Hello, I'm back with part 2 of Foundational Frameworks and Quality Improvement. We're going to talk about quality and error. You'll note that while this module also includes the Hammer article and the IOM articles, there are assignments which are focused on those specifically, so I'm not going to review those directly in the lectures. However, there will be considerable feedback and considerable information on that included in the responses to the information that you provide through the assignments. So let's start with quality and error. As stated before, Donabedian's model of quality includes the structure, process, and outcome of care. Get used to that those three words: structure, process, outcome. You'll hear them again and again and again. You'll also hear the name Donabedian until you really just don't want to hear it again. But he is probably the most important person in quality improvement, and you're just going to hear it all over. So let's talk about this. Error can considerably influence each domain: structure, process, and outcome. There are basically two approaches to error. We've got the individual approach, which says that you did wrong and it's because you whatever, and usually it points out some flaw in the individual's character, performance, or training. Treating each of those flaws as though the individual should have known better or should have done better. Alternatively, an example of the systematic approach would be, as the workload increases, we've noted that there has also been a considerable increase in the number of errors. That approach considers the error in context of the system in which the error takes place. The approach does not specify an individual as to blame. Instead, it focuses on the root cause of the error itself. And we're going to talk at great length about root cause analysis in the next lecture, by the way, or in I think, Module 3. Healthcare, by and large, we embrace the individual approach, and it's for this reason that healthcare is behind the curve in quality improvement, and why quality improvement is being pushed on healthcare from outside sources as opposed to coming in from internal sources. If an individual is to blame for an error, that's simple. That individual will quickly learn to hide the errors, not admit to the errors. It's really challenging to identify where the individual and the individual's error fits into Donabedian's model. And maybe it's in the structure of care because the individual didn't seek proper qualification or training. Maybe it's in the process of care because the individual didn't pay adequate attention to care or just didn't want to be troubled to provide good care. Ultimately, this leads to a really poor outcome of care. Now, several assumptions play into the individual approach. First, the individual lacks the necessary skills to do the job properly. Maybe the individual lacks sufficient character to prepare for the job, or is just too lazy to do it well. Maybe the individual is not sufficiently attentive to the needs of the healthcare consumer. This approach really works well if you're a healthcare administrator, because you can just blame the individual for the errors. You can say, well, it's her fault or his fault, and we're going to get rid of this individual and all the errors are going to go away. And in fact, this doesn't work at all. And usually what ends up happening is, as I said before, people hide error, or they try to do expensive, often unnecessary defensive care to respond to any individual error that might come up. And also there's the movement of good providers out of poor systems, which means that the healthcare consumers suffer because good providers are leaving the poor system. Error continues to grow worse, quality continues to grow worse, and the enterprise tends to chooses to ignore or hide the flaws and shadow it all in some level of secrecy. Now, the systematic approach, that has a little more validity in healthcare settings. The approach considers the structure of care, so it includes the personnel, the facilities, the equipment. The system is responsible for ensuring that there are enough properly trained personnel to provide care for the expected patient load. It is also the system's responsibility to ensure that the facility and the equipment in the provision of care are in good operating condition and are sufficient to the care provided. The system is responsible for ensuring that communication protocols and methods are sufficient, well practiced, include excellent feedback loops. The systematic approach also considers the process of care. It includes adequate time to make appropriate and proper observations, interventions, and follow-up. This includes making proper use of the facilities and the equipment, a well-timed, well-practiced workflow, and the skill and availability of supportive personnel, supportive services, and communications. Finally, the systematic approach considers the outcome of care by asking the question, did the patient improve or experience the outcome consistent with best practices? In the following scenario, I want you to think about this, and maybe this will find its way onto the quality blog. Think about who is responsible for this, the individual or the system. Now, the individual in this case is an emergency physician in a rural emergency department who misdiagnosed anaphylaxis as an asthma attack in a 41-year-old man who was in acute respiratory distress. He began this respiratory distress during his morning run. He had a self-reported, undocumented, untreated history of exercise-induced asthma. He was in otherwise good health. The physician prescribed an albuterol nebulizer treatment and pulse oximetry monitoring and left the bedside. The patient received the treatment, during which he suffered an acute respiratory and cardiac arrest and died. Using the individual approach, a review committee would stop collecting information at this point, blame the physician for missing an obvious diagnosis, consider her practice history, and then decide whether to keep her on staff as some kind of pariah or to end her employment altogether. Using the systematic approach, the committee would collect additional information, consider her workload during the last hour before the tragic death. In this case, they would find that the workload included 6 incoming patients with various diagnoses ranging from acute nosebleed in a 19-year-old woman who was accompanied by her boyfriend who would not leave her side, an elderly man experiencing a new onset of AFib with RVR complicated by acute exacerbation of COPD with an oxygen desaturation. Additionally, the electronic health record system was down for routine maintenance, causing a backlog in lab results, radiology reports, and requiring all nurse and physician providers to use paper to document and hand off for documentation of care and handoff reporting. And from this, the night shift physician left her a very quickly scribbled and poorly composed handoff on the 3 boarders awaiting admission left over from his shift. One of these was scheduled for the next available ICU bed. The others were scheduled for admission to med-surg units. During her assessment of the man that ultimately died, an attending physician called to give admission orders for one of the 3 patients awaiting admission to the hospital. Now, think about what is the more likely source of blame. Is the physician responsible for providing poor care, or is the system responsible for making good care impossible? I'm not judging on this. This is up to you to discuss or decide, but I'd like to see some good arguments on it. I think it's kind of a good opportunity to put something into the blog. Now, one of the papers that I did assign you is Cosnick, Brown, and Mond. They did what many have done over the past several years. They looked at aviation. Aviation is remarkably efficient, remarkably safe, and has a lot of ideas that can improve safety in nursing care. Major focus is in the aviation system is aviation culture. Individuals are not individuals. They're cogs in great wheels, and these cogs have to mesh just perfectly to ensure quality at the structure, process, and outcome levels. If the wheels don't mesh and something goes wrong, the system, not the individual, is to blame. And I have to quit in 1 more minute. Okay. Cosnick and colleagues focus on crew resource management, which maximizes decision-related communication, judicious use of technology, and the process improvement techniques that enhance function and improve quality. And I am going to stop right now and